With HBO Max now being rebranded Max, there has been some new content and new trailers announced to appear on the streaming service. One of them is another spin-off of Game of Thrones, which will follow the tales of Duncan Egg. The series of short novellas written by George R.R. Martin follows a knight for hire called Sir Duncan the Tall and his squire Egg, who is a Targaryen prince. The novellas are set around 90 years before the main events of the Game of Thrones series, and this is now the second spin-off series from Game of Thrones that has got a season order. We did get House of the Dragon, and we also got a pilot which failed to get greenlit at HBO called The Long Night. It has been confirmed that this series, Duncan Egg, has had a series order and may go on for several seasons. George R.R. Martin has commented on the fact that there's many novellas and they've been put together in the book A Night in the Seven Kingdoms, and the first series of this spin-off is going to be following the novella The Hedge Knight. I've not actually read any of the books by George R.R. Martin, but I did like the world that Game of Thrones created on the small screen, and I'm really enjoying what we've got in House of the Dragon so far, and I'm excited to see the second season of that maybe debut next year. At this time we are unsure when the series is going to start production, and the fact that we're getting season 2 of House of the Dragon, they may not want to have 2 Game of Thrones shows come out the same year, so the earliest we could get this could be 2025, but we'll have to wait and see. The announcement did come on the Max rebranding announcement of HBO Max, but George R.R. Martin, the author and who is also serving as an executive producer on this show, did make some comments on his Not a Blog, and as I'm not too familiar with the world of Night in the Seven Kingdoms and the tales of Duncan Egg, I'm going to be looking at some of the content from his Not a Blog post and basically break down his comments in regards to this new series. So here's what George R.R. Martin said on his Not a Blog post. The news is all over the internet by now. The announcement was made on the 12th at Warner Media's big press event for the rollout and rebranding of their new streamer, Max, coming your way on May 23rd. I was sworn to secrecy till then, but now that the word is out, I can go ahead and confirm, yes, it's true, there's another successor show on its way to you. Duncan Egg are coming to HBO. The working title will be A Night in the Seven Kingdoms, The Hedge Knight. Whether that will be the final title, I can't say for sure. Beyond saying that, no, it won't be called The Tales of Duncan Egg, or The Adventures of Duncan Egg, or anything along those lines. I love Dunk and I love Egg, and I know that fans refer to my novellas as the Duncan Egg stories, sure, but there are millions of people out there who do not know the stories, and the title needs to intrigue them too. If you don't know the characters, Duncan Egg sounds like a sitcom. Laverne and Shelley, Abbott and Costello, Beavis and Butthead, so no, we want knight in the title. Knighthood and chivalry are central to the themes of these stories. So I do think it's interesting that they are going to brand this as A Night in the Seven Kingdoms rather than Duncan Egg. I think he's right about having the show have Night in the title and be a spin-off of Game of Thrones. If they just called it The Tales of Duncan Egg, people might not connect it to the Game of Thrones universe, even with some branding from Game of Thrones. So I do think that's a wise decision to scrap that Duncan Egg title, even though that's like the unofficial title. It says like the first season is going to be called The Hedge Knight, and that's the name of the first novella, and having a subtitle for each season to sort of tell a story within this world in Westeros is quite a good idea. And Martin has said this isn't the final title, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, but I do think it will end up being called this. I can't imagine what else they'll call it, especially as Martin seems adamant not to have the Tales of Duncan Egg in the title. Moving on to what he said in the post, aside from the title, what else can I tell you? Not a lot. HBO has given us a green light to film for a full season, not just a pilot, most likely of 6 episodes, though that is not set in stone, and won't be until considerably later in the process. To date, I have written and published 3 novellas about Duncan Egg, The Hedge Knight, The Sworn Sword, and The Mystery Knight, each of them initially published independently in various anthologies before being collected together in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. So at the moment it looks like the first season is only going to be 6 episodes. I don't think that is necessarily a problem. I think people are annoyed that the final season of Game of Thrones only had 6 episodes, and there's rumours that House of the Dragon is only going to have 6 episodes in it. But then again, you said that like we have to build the story and then see the appropriate amount of episodes for this series. You know, they could maybe go on to do 10 episodes, but from the sounds of it, Martin does know how long he thinks it will work over a TV series, and the fact that Martin, before writing the Game of Thrones novels, did work as a television writer and now has worked as an executive producer as well on some big shows, that he'll have a good understanding of how long the season will be relevant to the text that it's adapting. Moving on, our premiere season will be an adaptation of the first of the 3 published novellas, The Hedge Knight, the tale of how Duncan Egg first met during a tournament at Ashford Meadow. The pilot script is already written, and I think it's terrific. It was written by Ira Parker, who is no stranger to Westeros. He was part of Ryan Condal's writing staff for the first season of House of the Dragon, and wrote the 4th episode of Hot D's first season, King of the Narrow Sea. That's the one where Prince Daemon returns to King's Landing after conquering the Stepstones and takes Princess Rhaenyra down to the sloughs of Fleabottom. Ryan Condal is on board as well as an executive producer, so am I. There's no date set yet for the series premiere or even for the show to begin shooting, but the writing is well underway. Ira has assembled a small but very talented team, and they are at it already, building on the foundations laid down last year in the previous creative summits, and of course of the original novella. The Duncan Egg novellas are fully fleshed narratives, more like the novels of the Song of Ice and Fire than the imaginary history of Fire and Blood. The stories are right there on the page, and our goal is to produce faithful adaptations for those tales on the screen. So the fact that we're having some of the creative team from House of the Dragon come back to work on this new project is exciting. I think the first season of House of the Dragon has done really well, and it has almost redeemed the poor last 2 seasons we got of Game of Thrones. It's interesting though that he compares the Duncan Egg novellas more like a Song of Ice and Fire, like the stories that are unfinished. The fact that Fire and Blood is sort of like a history of Westeros and it has some political bias in it, and adapting that is going to be different from adapting a narrative story. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if you're comparing it more like to Game of Thrones. I think that we are going to get a very good season. They've learned all the mistakes of adapting Game of Thrones series, and now that we've got House of the Dragon, they've learnt their lessons on that, and they can improve and keep improving on adapting new stories to tell in Westeros. And like I've said, he hasn't got an official start date yet, and they are still writing. They have written the pilot episode, but you know, this does have a series order, so it is going to get a full series anyway, of 6 episodes, potentially more. But I do think that we could get this by 2026. I don't think it will overlap with the 2nd season of House of the Dragon, and I think having a series of Westeros content come out every year but have different seasons will keep it fresh. So the fact that we're going to get House of the Dragon Season 2 in 2024, and then we may get the Hedge Knight in 2025, that's potential, but I don't think they'll want to clash. And we're also talking about potentially other spin-off series that are going to be set in Westeros, and I think Martin goes on to talk about that in a minute, and I will cover that when I get to it. Back to the blog. If the Hedge Knight turns out as well as I hope it will, our hope would be to go down and adapt the Sworn Sword and the Mystery Knight as well. That will take a few years. Then comes the hard part. Before we reach the end of the published stories, I will need to find time to write all the other Duncan Egg novellas that I have planned. There are, gulp, more of them than I had once thought. There's the Village Hero and the Winterfell story, the one with the she-wolves, and maybe I need to write a Dornish adventure to slip in between the Hedge Knight and the Sworn Sword. And after that there are more. I just need to finish the Winds of Winter and then do either A Dream of Spring or Volume 2 of Fire and Blood, and slip in a new Duncan Egg between each of those in my copious spare time, and that will keep me ahead of Ira and his merry crew for a few more years. Interestingly, Martin has said that he's going to write more novellas about Duncan Egg, and they will fit in between him finishing The Winds of Winter, adapting A Dream of Spring, and doing Volume 2 of Fire and Blood. And Martin has been quite a slow writer in regards to The Winds of Winter, and people think that he won't be able to finish it at all, not even get round to finishing A Dream of Spring or even starting A Dream of Spring. I do think the backlash of the final season of Game of Thrones hit Martin hard, and he's struggling to come up with new ideas for The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, and he's more at ease writing other stories that he kind of knows where the story is going. Like the Hedge Knight and the other stuff with the Duncan Egg stories are clearly set in the history of Westeros, and he has an idea of how they're going to fit into the larger narrative that he's created in this world. And the fact that they're novellas means he can write them a lot quicker than he can these epic Game of Thrones books, which tend to be about 500,000 words each, something like that. So I could see him moving on from Winds of Winter and maybe finishing Winds of Winter and then slipping in more Duncan Egg stories and maybe focusing on that for a few years in order to get ahead. But he's even said that Ira's writing them and he's going to have years between each season. Like I said, with House of the Dragon and then the Hedge Knight series, it's going to come out one each year most likely, and that means he'll have a 2-year window between each series. So let's say it does come out in 2025, and then 2 years after that is 27 for the second season and 29 for the third season. And so he's basically saying he will have a fourth and hopefully a fifth finished by 2031. I think that makes sense, and he could really do that if he pulls his finger out and is able to get through that and just finish these Duncan Egg novellas. And he may even get really passionate about it, and this might be his main focus. He may not want to do A Dream of Spring anymore or Fire and Blood Volume 2. I know that will upset a lot of people, but that's how it goes. The writer doesn't owe the fans anything, really. I'll just cover the final part of the post and then give my summary of the overall thoughts on this new season. So Martin goes on to say, "Well, I will worry about that tomorrow. Today we're celebrating Duncan Egg are coming. Those of you who have not made their acquaintance should pick up a copy of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms from your favourite local bookshop or online bookseller. You could check out your local comics shop as well. All 3 of the Duncan Egg novellas have been done as graphic novels and done very well with some great artwork by Mike S. Miller, who captured both characters perfectly. One more thing before I close. Way back in the summer of 2016, when HBO first announced thinking about Game of Thrones spin-offs, I pitched them 2 ideas: The Dance of the Dragons, which in due time became House of the Dragon, and Duncan Egg. That was 7 years ago. I can hardly believe it myself. The lesson there is that development takes time. I see all these stories on the net about other spin-offs being killed or abandoned, no idea where they get this stuff, and it just makes me shake my head. The Nymeria show is still in development, so is the Sea Snake show. Just had a great week on that one working with the writers, and there are others, both live action and animated. How many will get the green light like Duncan Egg? Impossible to say. How long will it take? It depends. No one knows for sure. When I was in grade school, there was a cop show that ended every week with "There are 8 million stories in the naked city. This has been one of them." And that was only New York City. Westeros and Essos are a lot bigger, with even more stories. We just need time to tell them. So Martin has alleged that other Game of Thrones spin-offs are in development, but there are many reasons the show doesn't go forward. They might not think it's the right audience. They might not think the show's content is going to be entertaining enough. There was this talk about the Long Night spin-off, and then that got cancelled after the pilot, and then House of the Dragon got greenlit straight away. We'll have to wait and see if these other series from HBO MAX and now the Max streaming service are going to go ahead. And I think Martin is going to be quite busy with all this content over the next few years, maybe not having the time to finish Winds of Winter or start A Dream of Spring, but I think he could really get behind finishing the Tales of Duncan Egg novellas, and he says he wants to do maybe 10, and he's already completed 3 of them, and he could probably bash each one of those out in a year, maybe. I know he's a very busy man writing other content and being executive producers on other shows, but I do think that he could really get behind this, as a 80,000 word novella is going to be a lot easier to write than a 500,000 word epic, which are all the books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. As I'm not too familiar with the novellas or the other stories, I'm not sure who you would cast in these roles, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on who you would like to see as Sir Duncan the Tall and Egg, or Aegon Targaryen I think he's called. I am excited to see how this series turns out, but as I said, it's quite a few years away yet, and we may just only get one season depending on how successful it is. But I am excited to return to Westeros in another way, something different from House of the Dragon and from Game of Thrones. I do think the show will turn out quite well, and I think the creative team behind this series has learnt their lessons from working on a Game of Thrones and how that sort of failed towards the end, and learning from the success of House of the Dragon. So I do think this series could turn out really well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the announcement of this new series. And if you haven't already, I'd love it for you to subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications for all of my videos. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in.